Yes, it's true. Apple has finally released their own EQ implementation to be used with the AirPods lineup, the ones that have the H2 chip at least. And obviously this is Apple we're talking about, so they went about it the Apple way, which means paring it down to its most base elements and making it accessible enough for potentially anyone to use. And this raises the question, is it too simplified? Is it too pared down such that people won't be able to get the adjustments that they actually need to make the sound to their preference? Or is it powerful enough that even the average audiophile nerd, hyperfixated on sound quality, will still be able to get meaningful improvement out of their AirPods? I have my own opinions on that. Let's go ahead and talk about it. Before we go further, I definitely want to mention, if you want to try this, the first thing you have to do is update your iOS device, whether it's an iPad or an iPhone, to the new iOS 27 developer beta, which is free to sign up for. I saw a few people didn't know that. And then you'll also have to update the firmware of your AirPods to the newest firmware. Once you've done all of that, you're going to go to your AirPods settings in the system settings of your iOS device. You're going to go to audio and routing, and then you're going to go to equalizer, and that brings you to the screen where you can start to make adjustments. Now, this screen that you first arrive at is, I would say, pretty clean, typical of Apple, but there's actually a few things about it that I think are really cool. So the first thing at the top you're going to see is there's a toggle between recommended and custom. Recommended is just the stock sound profile, and then custom engages the EQ and allows you to start making changes. Now, one hidden benefit that I think is actually really cool about the recommended and custom buttons is that they functionally serve as a very high quality A/B switch. The custom is your EQ'd sound and the recommended is the stock sound, but when you switch between them, regardless of what EQ changes you've made with the custom profile, the level matching between them is exceptional. Like, I am not sure I've actually encountered a better level matching algorithm than whatever it's doing between these two settings. So I love this because it encourages people to A/B between them, and it gives people a very good idea of how they would actually compare when level differences are taken out of the equation. The second thing I want to talk about is above the graphical EQ interface, there's a little playhead where you get a play pause button and it pulls up whatever you're listening to. I use Apple Music, so I think this integration works a little bit cleaner. When I was listening to things either in a web browser or YouTube, maybe it's a glitch of the developer beta, but it wasn't following it exactly, so it wasn't showing that I was, say, listening to a YouTube video. But that said, you can play and pause from this little playhead, and what I like about this is it actually encourages people to listen while they're making the EQ adjustments and basing the adjustments on what they hear. While this may seem a little bit obvious, I think a lot of people in the audiophile sphere specifically will end up caring more about how it looks on a measurement versus a target instead of how it actually sounds to them as far as how they're tweaking the EQ and personalizing it. So I actually think this was a great move on Apple's part to make the focus listening to music. And right below this playhead, you get the graphical EQ interface, which is, yes, very simplified. I assume they didn't want to intimidate anyone with a full parametric EQ stack or anything like that. So it does look clean, but there are a few issues when it comes to how opaque it is visually and how that relates to what's actually going on under the hood, because there is quite a bit of disconnect there, which we'll get into a little bit later. Now, I do have a few gripes with this interface visually. For one, it has this little waveform that tracks the music you're listening to and plays a waveform of sorts. It's not a perfect representation of your music, but for example, if the kick drum is hitting, you will see the low end of the waveform kind of pulsing along with the kick drum, which is like a neat visual touch, I guess, but it being so centrally located in the middle of the graph and oriented horizontally across, it does make it hard to know exactly where the zero is sometimes. So if you want to manually bring a band back to zero, that can be a little bit difficult. And my other gripe would be, I guess, filed under like power user stuff. Like, I do wish it had an undo function or some sort of memory or even a preset function that allowed you to save an EQ profile you really like. Because as of right now, if you land on something you really like, but you want to try something else, you have to get rid of what you liked, try that new thing, and then if you want to go back to the old thing that you liked, you have to do it manually, which, because of how the actual sliders work, they do snap, but the steps are very small, and with touchscreens, it's pretty hard to like be precise with how you release your finger. So you never know if it's going to be snapping in the right place or the same place as it did last time you did this. So there are just these little things that make precision not really something that can be done with this sort of tool. But that being a problem really comes down to the question of, is precision needed? And I'm going to be honest, for something like the AirPods Pro 2, I'm not necessarily sure it is. Let's go ahead and talk about how this EQ actually changes the sound, and a few of the quirks people are going to need to know before they dive in here. The first quirk I want to talk about is that the range of each adjustment is somewhat dependent on how you have the level set. If you are a loud volume listener, you may find that the positive gain adjustments for things like the bass are limited by the headroom inherent to the system. So for example, if you're listening at full volume, which I would never advise you do, but if you're one of those people or you're hard of hearing or something like that, if you're listening at full volume and you try to boost the bass, you actually won't be able to get the full 8 decibels of adjustment that is available when you're listening at lower volumes. And the same is true of the mid-range filter, where if you try to boost, but you're already listening at full volume, you really will not get anywhere near the full, I think, 6 decibels of gain adjustment that you have on tap when you're listening at a lower volume. The second quirk, and potentially the most confusing for people who aren't watching this video, is that the mid-range filter is actually 2 filters. When you're cutting, it's actually a negative peaking filter centered at around 900 hertz with a Q of 0.5, and you can cut this by about 10.5 decibels or so. But when you're boosting, it actually switches to a different filter, which is centered at around 1750 hertz, and you can boost this up to around 5 decibels with also a Q of 0.5. So this is, I think, why they had to keep the visual interface kind of vague, because if it was, say, a parametric EQ or something like that, they wouldn't be able to do this sort of thing where it's a different filter when you're cutting versus boosting. I actually think this idea is pretty smart, because I think for this class of product, the kind of person who wants more mid-range is going to want it around that 1 kilohertz to 2 kilohertz area, whereas the person who wants less is probably going to want less out of the core center mid-range around 1000 hertz or below. The third and final quirk is to do with the symmetry of gain adjustment of the filters. As I already said, the mid-range filter can be cut by up to 10.5 decibels or boosted up to 5 decibels. The bass and treble filters are a little bit different though. So the low filter can be boosted by 8 decibels or cut by 7 decibels, and the treble filter can also be boosted by 8 decibels, but can only be cut by 6 decibels. So even though visually there's this sense of symmetry between the amount of boost and cut you can do, it is different for every filter, and people are going to need to know that. So talking about the actual parameters of the filters, the low shelf filter is a second order filter. If you're using like a simple parametric EQ, go for a Q of around 0.8, and the corner frequency is, I was getting results anywhere from like 150 to 160 decibels, so anywhere between that is probably fine for approximating the effect of this filter. And as said, you can boost it up to 8 decibels or cut it by 7 decibels. The corner frequency of the high range filter is right around 5000 hertz, and I was getting this pretty consistently. It is also a second order filter, and again, this can be boosted 8 decibels or cut 6 decibels. And really the question with any EQ implementation that's tied to a device like this is how well are these bands placed both for the stock tuning of the device. So is it likely that people are going to want, say, 5000 hertz and above cut when they want to adjust the sound of this headphone? And how well these bands are placed when it comes to how likely people are going to want to adjust any headphone. We know people tend to prefer different bass and treble levels, so how well do these filters approximate the adjustments people would typically want to make? So when it comes to the placement of these bands in terms of what frequencies they adjust, I actually think for the most part this was done exceptionally well. Again, the mid-range I think is pretty uncontroversial. The people who want more upper mid-range are going to want it in that ear gain rise area from 1 to 3 kilohertz, whereas the people who want to cut more are probably likely to just want more bass and treble emphasis, so it being located more centrally makes sense. But the one that had the most likelihood of being done poorly was the treble shelf, and I actually think they just nailed it. Like, they put it exactly where it should go. They gave it the right amount of contour and steepness such that for someone like me who finds the AirPods a little bit bright, it cuts the treble without affecting the mid-range at all. And for other people who want maybe just a little bit more sizzle, a little bit more energy, they'll be able to do that without affecting the already quite good mid-range response. And it is both tailored to the response of these IEMs and headphones very well, but also it's placed right around where we would start to see big interpersonal differences as far as the contributions of our anatomy. The bass shelf is probably the one I think people are going to have the most issues with though. It is a little bit too high up in frequency such that the shelf adjustment does actually impact the mid-range a little bit too much. And for things like the AirPods Pro 3, if it uses the same filters as I was able to get with the AirPods Pro 2, it's going to be cutting quite a bit of low mid-range, and it's going to start to sound a little bit hollow. So overall, a little bit of a mixed bag, but I do think for the most part, it's actually really good, and the filter choices totally make sense. I just wish the bass shelf was shifted a little bit lower in frequency, so we weren't impacting the low mid-range as much as it currently is. So wrapping it all up, like the total package here, I'm actually very happy with this interface and how this EQ works and the results I'm able to get with it. While yes, I would have preferred more granularity, maybe some memory features like presets, ultimately this had to be a compromise because Apple's audience is so wide, they have to think about making this accessible for the widest variety of people. And when it comes to the balance of compromises they went for, I think they basically nailed it. It's a very easy to use interface that prioritizes actually listening to the music and making adjustments by ear. And the level matching algorithm between recommended and the custom EQ profile is straight up one of the best level matching algorithms I've ever used. So I really love that. I do wish there was more transparency in terms of what the visual adjustments actually corresponded to sonically. And I do wish that the low shelf was tuned a little bit differently. But overall, I'm very happy with the changes I'm able to make on this. And I'm very glad that what is by far my favorite audio device, the one I use the most by orders of magnitude, I now get a better sound out of it that is much closer to my favorite audiophile IEMs. So yeah, kudos to Apple for finally giving us something that frankly we should have had a long time ago, but the implementation is good, and I think they deserve some credit for that. Hopefully we can maybe get some power user features down the line, but I'm not holding my breath for that. I'm happy with what I've got, and because the tuning of these was already so solid, the small adjustments I make do really make it sound excellent. So yeah, that's going to be it for this video. If you have any more questions about the AirPods Pro 2, 3, or AirPods Max 2 and how they relate to this EQ, I was only able to collect data with the AirPods Pro 2. I'm hoping to have Andrew collect data with the other ones a little bit later. And when all that stuff is collected, we're going to be posting that in the forum link down below. So definitely check out that forum thread if you're watching this a little bit later and want to see if we've updated that. But also, if you have any questions for me about any of this stuff or audio more broadly, you can hit me up on our Discord server at discord.gg/headphones. And lastly, I just want to give a shout out to headphones.com for making this video and all the videos on this channel possible. So if you're thinking about purchasing an audio device, definitely make sure to check out headphones.com. All right, that's been it for me. Y'all have a good rest of your day. Later.